because we have this stability to see them and not be caught in them. The thing about the hindrances, I think also that's really significant, is that they're universal. They're part of being human. So the Buddha isn't saying there's something wrong with us because hindrances to practice arise in the mind. He's actually just saying, that's the way the mind is. And if we want to train the mind, it's like training an animal. You have to know its strengths and then you have to know its weaknesses and limitations. So, this is what's unique about our practice, that we actually turn towards what's difficult. And oftentimes we think, oh, that's turning towards the problems in our life, the problems out there. But it also means turning towards what's difficult in the mind itself. The mind itself has habits that have been practiced through our whole life and before we were born, this human mind. And getting to know that is actually very helpful. One of my favorite teachings from the Buddha is about before he was awakened, how he sat down. It's called the two kinds of thinking. And he said, what he was going to do is divide his thoughts into two piles. The ones that were motivated by greed and hatred and delusion, he put in one pile. Those that were motivated by renunciation, loving kindness, and compassion, he put in another pile. And he could see that that first pile created suffering for himself, for others, for both himself and others, and that the second pile was beneficial. And, at that point in the story, it says, so he stopped doing it. He stopped having thoughts of ill will and speaking out of ill will and stuff like that. But, for us, it might take longer. And that's why it's important to actually pay attention to these qualities that, distort awareness and compel us to do things that we later regret and actually do lead to unhappiness. So, there are five hindrances, and I'm sure many of you are aware of what they are. There's sense desire, wanting, wanting only pleasant experiences. I like Uchejaniya says, is that fair? But certainly is. I mean, it's a very frustrating way to go through life, and it takes a lot of effort, and it never pays off because life isn't like that. So it's a problem, but we all get caught in it. And the opposite is ill will, where we actually think that wishing someone harm or is going to make us happy or them happy, or it's that we just want to get rid of anything that gets in our way and in the way of our happiness as we perceive it. And then there's sloth and torpor, um, the feelings of kind of being too dull, too tired, too deflated, depressed, whatever, to actually practice, to give rise to, our good intentions, that we're just too wiped out, and restlessness and anxiety. So those are kind of opposites. One is not enough energy. Restless and anxiety is, this kind of uncontrolled energy that's just going all over the place. And then the last one is doubt. So, of course, we all are familiar with these hindrances, and but we may not be familiar or with how being caught in the hindrance, when we're looking at the world through the hindrance, how it really distorts our perception, that we're not seeing clearly. One of the things that's really fun about going to IMS is the land is very beautiful there, and there's really a great walking. And when you walk, it goes around a pond called Gaston Pond, and I fell in love with the Buddhist teachings about the hindrances. Like there are some of my favorite teachings because they're very visual and very colorful. And the Buddha compares like the hindrances to water, to seeing through clear water or seeing through water that's distorted. So if you go to Gaston Pond on a clear day, like you can see all the way down to the bottom. You can see what's ever there, rocks and leaves and little fish and maybe a shoe or a beer can or whatever is there. You can actually see it the way it is. And this is what the Buddha is saying a clear mind is like. You actually can see reality. And it also reflects like the leaves, like in the fall, all the different colored leaves you can see on the surface of the water. Um, and that's the way it is with the clear mind. It can actually perceive, has this amazing ability to reflect what's actually happening. The problem is we don't often, or at least sometimes, we don't like what's happening. We don't like what's happening. And what we miss by our reactivity is the clear seeing that what's ever happening is of the nature to arise and pass away. That suffering is actually a part of life. We are vulnerable. And that we're kind of interconnected with everything. We're not separate, a separate self. So depending on what's going on in the mind, we relate to that very differently. Sometimes we can see it clearly and develop wisdom, and that wisdom actually allows us to make wise responses and choices. At other times, we just don't want to go there. The mind can't, it isn't flexible enough, and it starts to come up with these strategies that think would be a better way to go. These strategies like sense getting more, eating more cake or, making the phone call or, sending the email we'll regret or, it's that kind of the mind just starts scheming and strategizing in ways that aren't helpful. I kind of like to think of my mind maybe like a messy desk. Like I can't really get to work because like there's just such a mess in there. So when we know the hindrances, those 5 piles of experience, we can kind of start organizing our desk. Oh, that's ill will. Oh, this is anxiety. This is doubt. And we kind of or make enough of a clearing that we can actually see what's happening. And part of seeing what's happening is seeing those piles, seeing what's going on in the mind. So I thought what I would do is just go through the analogies that the Buddha offers for what happens to that water. And I know, like, we've all heard them, or many of us have heard them before. But because we're always developing and changing as we practice, when we revisit these teachings, we're actually like hearing them and seeing them at a different level. They're really, at first it's kind of, oh, they're just like really pretty descriptions, really so accurate. And it's kind of like, wow, the Buddha, like, probably had these experiences too, because they're so accurate. They're like written by somebody who knows what he's talking about. And that in itself makes us feel better, I think. And then we go through like periods, where we kind of realize this is hard. Working with the hindrances is hard. But then I think there's like a kind of way that we get to see the hindrances that we know that, wow, we're seeing them. That's good. There's like a kind of like a more of an understanding or an acceptance of our common humanity. And they become really interesting. I mean, you could just read the newspaper and go through like greed, hatred, delusion. Like, I mean, they're like all around us. And when we understand their nature, we can see how so much of what's going on in ourselves and in others is compelled. And it's kind of a way of softening around it is actually to realize, that they're not happening by mistake. They're happening because of causes and conditions. They're happening because we don't see them. We don't understand them. And seeing them and understanding them is actually a very interesting practice. And we can actually become very concentrated and very established in mindfulness by paying attention to these qualities. So the Buddha says we have to know when they're there and know when they're not. He doesn't say get rid of it. Our first thing is to know when they're there, but then the knowing when they're not there, that happens more and more as we practice. We start to appreciate like the freedom, the good feeling of a collected, unified, stable mind. That's also something that changes as we practice over time. So the first of the hindrances is ill will. No, sorry, sense desire, the practice of the wish for pleasant experiences. And the Buddha says that this is like there's dye in the water. Like we're looking through the water, like we're looking through very beautiful colored dye. Like, oh, if only, he calls me. I'll be so happy. My life will be just perfect if I'm with this person, or I get this job, or I eat this meal, or I get that parking place, or, it's just like endless, like a wanting, wanting, wanting. My daughter, when she was young, wanted pierced ears, and my friend gave her a book, and it was, I want them, I need them, I have to have them, about a little girl getting her ears pierced. But that's kind of the mindset of sense desire. And one of the things about seated meditation that's really helpful is it gives us an opportunity, like a clean sheet of paper, to see these mind states come into the mind. And when we're meditating, fantasy is often the way that sense desire shows up, you know. And I did that for so many years. And it's hard to see that there's any problem with it because it feels good. And, and it's all about you feeling good. So, it's like, why not? But there is a good reason why not. I mean, I was definitely a fantasizer. That is my like way of dealing with reality. And I was the kind of kid that looked out of the window at school for hours at a time. And it was really fun, except when I got my report card. Then it wasn't so fun anymore. And that's how it is. When we lose ourselves in fantasy, we actually aren't engaging in reality. We're not actually nourishing ourselves with things that, actually have an impact on our life. Um, Once when I was at IMS, another time it was in the fall, and they have these like apple trees there that have like millions of apples on. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but a lot of apples on every branch. I'd never seen anything like it. There's just like, like every inch of the tree is just covered with apples, and the whole length of the branch, not like at the end. I don't know. Like oranges, they're kind of like scattered throughout the tree. And I thought I really wanted at the end of the tree to go get a picture of these apples. So I, took my iPhone, I went to take a picture, and every time I framed it, there was like wormholes or like some dark spot. Like it never looked like my fantasy of what that apple tree was. That's the problem with sense desire. We don't really see impermanence or suffering as an aspect of reality. We think we can just keep getting what we want. And what we miss is like, it's like being a hamster in a cage. Our whole culture is like addicted to sense desire. There's never any rest. Like if you can just relax with the way things are, that's when you can rest. If it has to be pleasant, 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 it's like you're doomed to this cycle of suffering. The Buddha said, like, being, addicted to sense pleasure, caught in that, is like being in debt. Like you owe something. You're not content with what you have. You have, and and when we're free of it, when we let go of it, it's like being out of debt. And um, I really want to emphasize that knowing of when it's gone, the knowing of when it's gone. That morning when you wake up and it's like that thought that's been plaguing you forever is gone. Like, that's a good moment, and there's a lot to learn from that. So, ill will, the Buddha said, it's like boiling water. The water's boiling. I mean, we know what that's like, that feeling of rage or, you know, and the water's boiling. And all of these hindrances have many flavors. So some of them for ill will would be irritability, frustration, anger, blame, grouchiness, aversion, self-righteousness, discontent, criticism, hostility, distaste. It's easier to see than sense desire because it's not so pleasant. Although sometimes it can be pleasant to get really angry, but um, but I mean, and sometimes I just want to make clear that anger can be justified and it can actually bring a lot of energy and so it's not that we want to get rid of anger or a feeling of discernment about something, not being wholesome or good. The problem is that the feeling of anger can compel us to do things that really we regret. And that's the thing. All of these hindrances have feelings associated with them, like in the body. Like we feel like if we tell someone off, we're going to feel better. Like we have to. We're like compelled. Like, sense desire like pulls us in and aversion pushes us away. And we're just like in this cycle that we can't break. Um, Sometimes it can feel like we have a multiple hindrance attack. They all come at once. I was thinking, I use this example on the retreat with walking meditation. I hated walking meditation when I started for a lot longer than, for a long time. Um, and so, I had a ill will, aversion towards walking meditation. And then, I would get sloth and torpor. I could feel like, oh, I can't walk. I'm just too tired. And then, desire for sense pleasure. Oh, I would go have a cup of tea. And then, it just would go on and on like that. And then anxiety that I was a bad practitioner. Why can't I like do walking meditation? And then doubt, well, like maybe this isn't right for me. It would just like, and that's kind of how it is with hindrances. They just sort of build on each other if they're not seen. So, so getting out of when ill will passes, the Buddha says that it's like being not being sick anymore. Like when like an illness passes, because ill will kind of makes us feel sick, and it makes us like feel like we could feel better by doing harm. I mean, that is like a really toxic mind state, actually, and it's a very common one. mumbling under your breath about like the person driving next to you, or whatever it might be. So yeah, um, the thing with ill will, like an antidote to it, is our loving kindness practice, is the kind of realization that we're all in this together, and that softening of the boundaries of kindness, and allowing our hearts to be free of that ill will. And it's helpful to turn towards it, because when we see how much it causes us to suffer, our wisdom develops and is willing to let it go. And then we come to sloth and torpor, that feeling of, you know, um, just not having the energy to continue. And one of the things that emphasized a lot in Buddhist practice is balanced effort, balanced energy. So if we strive a lot, really work hard, sloth and torpor is bound to follow, because we can't maintain. We're just kind of really working hard, then really not working, and working hard. And what we want more is a very light, continuous mindfulness, something that's sustainable, because then we can begin to see cause and effect. Otherwise, we're just in isolated moments and we don't get the full value of the mindfulness practice. So, this is more talking than I've done in a while. It feels a little odd. Um, so, one of the things I think that I found really interesting, that I heard Sayadaw Tejaniya say about practice and effort, is that practice, um, wise effort, isn't motivated by should. When we practice because we should, that's actually greed in the mind. We should practice because we're interested. Interest, love, appreciation, that actually naturally gives rise to effort. But should gives rise eventually to exhaustion, because it's based on a kind of subtle ill will and desire to get to, that we're supposed to be doing something that we don't want to do. But actually, we do want to do this. We have to connect with that wholesome intention, our wish to open our heart, our wish to live with dignity, to be really truly interested in that. It's not something we should do, it's something we want to do. And that wholesome interest is the best antidote to sloth and torpor. And restlessness and anxiety, uh, the best antidote to that, and restlessness and anxiety is okay, so sloth and torpor, mud in the water; restlessness, anxiety, wind on the water. You know how hard it is to think like on a windy day when like you're kind of being blown around. And so that what restlessness, anxiety do in the mind is they make us jump from thing to thing. It's like we can't stay long enough to get past the superficial. We're just like here and there and this and that obsessive thinking, and it just keeps going. And the best antidote to that is actually our practice of the precepts of non-harming, so that there's less remorse in the mind, that the mind actually feels at ease with itself, it trusts itself, calms down. Um, our culture kind of promotes restlessness and anxiety. Like, just imagine you were living at a time where people sewed their clothes and grew their vegetables and chopped them and cut them and cooked, and, or sharpening a knife. The steadiness, the patience of that would be more naturally established in the mind if instead of just like throwing it out and buying a new one on Amazon. So we have, that's why relaxation, I think, is an important skill to develop, um, in our cultural, the world that we live in, because anxiety is like being busy is actually considered a virtue in our culture. We don't really appreciate that in order to be less superficial, to kind of contact something more profound and deep, we need to stay. We need to be steady and be able to stay with something, reflect on it, ponder it, learn from it. That takes time and a kind of steady patience. And the last of the hindrances is doubt. And doubt is like there's algae. No, is doubt mud? And who knows? I think it's algae in the water with doubt. Anyway, it's kind of like no, sloth. I think I did it wrong. Doubt is mud in the water, and sloth and torpor is algae. Because sloth and torpor, it's like the water's at your ankles and you can't like walk, so that's like glue. And doubt is like mud where you can't see clearly. And and doubt is, it's being uncomfortable with not knowing actually promotes doubt. So my yoga teacher BKS Iyengar used to say that what you know is limited and that what you don't know is limitless. And so focus on what you know. When you practice, focus on kindness, mindfulness, wholesome motivation. Focus on what you know and get comfortable that you will never know everything. With doubt, there's a kind of sense of like, should I do this? Should I do that? What will get me to, the absolute right knowing everything? And nothing will. We have to invest in actually what we're doing in the moment. So doubt's kind of compared to like digging a well, 100 wells a foot deep, but we never really get down to water because we're not investing. We're kind of just, should I, shouldn't I, should I, coulda, woulda, shoulda kind of state of mind. So just to say that these are the 5 hindrances of practice. Each of them has particular feelings in the body. They have particular thought patterns associated with them, actions that we're compelled to take. And when we are not aware of these mind states, we're driven by them. We're just in an endless cycle of repetition. But when we see them, we actually are mindful of them. It's as good as being mindful of anything else. Mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness of the hindrances, mindfulness of gratitude. It's all mindfulness. And it's our mindfulness and awareness that will develop wisdom. And then it's wisdom that will let these go because they actually don't lead to happiness. These mind states, when they're seen and understood, are just visitors to the mind. Awareness is way bigger. Compassion is way bigger than these visitors, and they will eventually leave. So I think that's our time. This is a new schedule for me. So I don't know if there's any questions or comments about the hindrances.
Hi. I had a question about
Mm-hmm.
doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Is it more like self-doubt, or is it more like doubting the practice or the path, or could it be both?
It's there. There's three, I think. There's doubt of ourselves, doubt of the teacher, doubt of the teachings. So, and it can be all of them. Faith is an antidote, or confidence is an antidote to doubt. And it's said like there's bright faith. When we first hear the teachings, it's like a light bulb goes on, and it's like, aha, this is really great. And but that's a kind of brittle or fragile, because what happens if the person who shared those teachings with you turns out to be unethical? So then we have to like look at the teachings in and of themselves and get confidence that it isn't really shattered. So it goes from bright faith to verified faith, like we practice and we find out it's true, and then to abiding faith. It doesn't actually waver. But a lot of people I see, the doubt is in themselves. They believe in the teachings, they believe in awakening. It's just like hard to imagine for them, but that's the teaching, that it is possible for you too. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I recently had this experience where I got triggered
Uh-huh.
by someone's comment, and I didn't react except inside
Uh-huh.
for a few days actually, and then I caught it,
Uh-huh.
and then I was disgusted
Uh-huh.
by myself, and then I thought I was so beyond this, and then I was more disgusted by myself because I didn't match my own
Yes.
standards of behavior. And it's such I don't know, a slide down into an abyss
Yeah.
that, how do you counteract that?
Well, it's really hard, I think, to regret actions or things that we've done. I think this is just a really, if we're a sensitive person and we care, it's a very hard thing. And I've thought about this a lot, because there are these two like pillars of the Dharma that are translated as moral dread and moral shame or something like that. And it's like, but they're the pillars of the Dharma. So I really was thinking about it one night, and I thought as I fell asleep, like, oh, these are actually supposed to uphold our energy. They're supposed to give rise to determination that we won't do that again, that we're going to keep practicing, that we see the suffering from what we've done, and we're going to try to repair it and not do it again. So if you can kind of catch that wave and see that this is actually part of the process of growth, you can't really grow unless you're willing to look at what you regret. And that there will be another chance. It's kind of, you make the amends the best you can, and you learn from those mistakes. If our practice leads to a despair and an inability to practice, we've really set the bar too high, and we're really being unrealistic. So I think that frame, like if you really hold on to that frame, it can actually flip it. Because it's already gone, It's like, and it's happened because you were human, and these patterns have been going on long before you were born. I mean, it takes a lot of courage and faith to say, all right, that wasn't my best moment, and I'm going to learn from this. And that's actually what being mindful of the hindrances is about. It does take a kind of ability to not be so personal about our shortcomings. Otherwise, it's just too painful. And it's not true. It's not just you. It's like we're all in this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what you were saying just reminded me of something that I
Uh-huh.
saw about the Dalai Lama, who
Uh-huh.
was asked, "Do you think it's important to evaluate your practice?" And he said, "Oh, yes, I do it at least once every 20 years."
Yeah. Yeah. So, is there any more questions or comments? It is nice to see everybody. I kind of wished I had brought a more cheerful topic. I was like, oh, we should just be having a party. I haven't seen you guys for so long. But we have to, yeah, stick with the program if we want to make progress. So I guess that's good for today then. And yeah, thank you for your practice. And let's dedicate the merit for a moment. Let's just sit for a moment. Let's dedicate the merit, blessings, insights, wisdom, and compassion from our practice to all beings everywhere without exception. May all beings be happy and know the causes of happiness. Thank you. Thank you for your practice. See you soon. Oh, and I wanted to mention that Jack and Trudy and Father Boyle and Sean Korn and George Mumford are offering a benefit for Insight LA. And also, your Donna for today, your generous Donna throughout the year, attending events like this, actually is what keep our doors open. Um, yeah, it's expensive to live in LA. It's next Saturday. Okay, at 5 o'clock. 1 to 5 next Saturday. So it's really a day of practice at the Skirball, which is a beautiful place to practice. So yeah, you should sign up and enjoy. Okay, thank you.